Right. Hey, thank you for staying for the book talk. Let's get to the book talk section right now. We're going to start off with what we call not really spoiler book talk, but I wanted to start off by talking about the differences in the vault, in the show, and the books. And this kind of is wide ranging. So in season 1, we saw there was that room of video monitoring of the silo hidden in a janitor's closet. To me at the time, I hopefully didn't spoil anybody, but there isn't something like that in the books, and it wouldn't really even make too much sense. If you have a video monitoring room, which let's say 20 people, maybe 12 people are coming in and out of a janitor's closet, somebody's going to notice that because everybody's walking up and down the stairs. People are all over this silo. And also, if you have a video monitoring room where 12 people are monitoring, that's 12 people now. You go 50 years and that's possibly close to 100 people in and out of that room. That's not going to stay a secret. It didn't make too much sense to me. And again, in the book, there really isn't a room hidden in a janitor's closet. What's interesting about the vault in the book is that the vault on the show, Bernard opens it up. There's this room with a bunch of lights, a great video monitor. There are times that seem like holograms on the desk in front of him, but really there's just a book there, right? Like there's just the book, The Order there, where in the novel, this is what the vault, the equivalent of the vault is in the book. So if anybody's been in an actual server room, and this book was written at least 13 years ago, an actual server room is normally on a raised floor because cables run underneath it. And it's just racks and racks of computer servers, fancy PCs, right? Little servers, and they run. And so the way the book had it was that this server room was only accessed by 12 people. But if you talk to 11 of those people, let's say, 11 of them, you would say, hey, what's in there? And they go, well, just a bunch of computer servers, right? Like just a bunch of, hardware that we need to keep care of, cables running, AC running so the servers stay cool and all this stuff. But in the server room, 1 or 2 of the people who go into the server room would know that the server room had a secret passageway to a hidden room. Mm-hmm. Where the order was and where encyclopedias are and where everything's secret. So to me, that makes more sense. That's an easier thing to keep secret. Once again, you have 12, maybe 20, maybe 50 people walking in the server room. When they go home at night, they're not going to say, oh, do you know in the server room there's a secret passage to something else? They'd be like, honey, what's in the server room? And they say, well, just a bunch of computers that run things. Right, yeah. The one thing I guess the show has is it's a real fancy room with lights everywhere and a big screen and, like I said, possibly some holograms. Catfish, do you have any thoughts about how the server room is in the hidden room in the server room in the book is compared to the vault on the show?
It's just more interesting because it's a hidden area.
Right. And the crazy thing about the vault is that everybody knows about it. Everybody would know, oh yeah, there's this room that only Bernard can access. So if you were having a rebellion, certainly you would want to get into that secret, the room that everybody knows Bernard's accesses. Where in the book, the rebellion might be, hey, let's get into the server room. But because the secret room that you access via the server room is so well hidden, even if rebels got into the server room, it's highly unlikely that they would find the secret passage to the place where Solo and where Bernard and Bernard Shadows live. So Correct. To me, it made more sense in the book, but, I don't think it's really that huge of a deal. But that's my own thought. Catfish, you read this book and reminded yourself of it. You probably, like me, read it back, in 2011 or something. What surprised you reading it again? In what maybe frustrated you reading it again?
What I liked about it was there was all that action in there that is great, and there's a lot going on, but also the characterizations are sort of thin. I really funnily did not. The Lukas Juliette relationship, I didn't buy. Okay. It almost seemed like he was like that. He was, and maybe this is left over from the show, but it was like I didn't trust him. Okay. I thought maybe he was undercover, and then I just didn't buy their connection to each other. The other thing is, it's funny, even though there is a lot of action in the book, and I don't know if you want me to go to like the end of the book.
Well, before hold off, because some people we haven't. Okay. Let's not go there. But was there a point that you were going to say before you got to the end of the book, or about the action?
I've just some of the action in the book is, without spoiling anything, sort of anticlimactic. Yeah, I see why they're doing it. They want to make it a surprise. Some things a surprise to us, but because of that, we get stuff that's exciting happening, told to us what happened after the fact rather than experiencing it.
The way I like to think of it, if you have read that first Game of Thrones book, not the show, but the first Game of Thrones book, the first kind of battle that Robb Stark's army fights in the book, and actually in the show too, there's no POV character in it. So you're living it through Catelyn, who is getting reports of what's happening in the war. And so it really feels like that. Some of the action in this book happens off page, for lack of a better word. And I just thought, oh, well, the show will just do it. And that'll kind of make up for it. But right now, the show, which I've already mentioned on multiple spoiler specials, the show is really trying to delay the rebellion, which to me seems absolutely crazy. Again, Juliette walking and surviving a cleaning should have rocked everybody's world. And okay, on the show, they're painting this JL graffiti. But like everybody in this silo would be beyond belief. It would be the biggest thing ever. And the fact she didn't come back would be the biggest thing ever. And in the book, that happens. And I always say the decision to go to rebellion kind of happens immediately. There's not any of this kind of, ooh, I'm Bernard, I'll try to tamp down the thought of the rebellion. It's like everybody realizes it's going to happen. People start making moves. It's not necessarily action immediately, but people are like, we are going to rebel. This is it. We're going to do it. The show not doing that, admittedly, it is a book reader thought. So if you haven't read the book, I guess I can understand you still not being so impatient and so kind of like, what are we doing? I watched this show through 4 episodes and I'm like, what are you doing? Get on with it. We all know there's going to be a rebellion. You could have really high stakes. If the rebellion starts right now, you have high stakes maybe for these 4 characters who are trying to run down a stairwell. But you could have high stakes for like everybody, for the whole silo, where it doesn't really feel like that right now, at least to me. Thoughts?
Right. Well, it feels like they're building up to it. And I will say, I think the one thing that maybe they're doing better on the show, or at least building up better to on the show, is having the entire silo against mechanicals.
Yeah.
Rather than just judicial and Bernard, etc., where they're whipping up they kind of talk about the uppers not being happy, but to really see people being whipped up against mechanical makes it seem like it's them against everybody instead of them just against the judicial raiders.
I'm going to say real quick that unlike Catfish, I did buy into the Lucas-Juliette relationship that develops over the first book. I will say that for me, it becomes easier to really buy into it based on things that happen after Juliette goes out on her cleaning. I think that's the part where I really get to understand, okay, I get how these two have a relationship. But to get any further into that, we're going to have to go into deeper book spoilers than this kind of light stuff. So at this point, we are going to talk about the end of the first book. If you kind of stuck around for this part, we really suggest we don't want to spoil anybody. So if you don't want to know anything, please do leave. And once again, we'll talk to you next week. So, all right, Catfish, let's get to it. Your end of the book action stuff. Let's hear it.
I mean, there's 2 things. One is, again, how he makes a trade-off of us being surprised that it's Bernard rather than Lukas who's doing the walk.
Yeah.
He makes that trade-off for all the exciting stuff of Billings and everybody else who's involved turning against Bernard, which is like what we want in the entire book. So to me, that's a horrible trade-off, especially because so much of the action is well described. The fighting between mechanical and the judicial raiders, the when Juliette does her dive and everything that as a result of that's so exciting.
Yeah, the cross-cutting. I want to pause on a couple things. Number one, I actually disagree with you in that I understand he really loses a lot of action. But for me, the whole book, I had thought Billings was a stooge. I thought he was on the bad side. And admittedly, there are subtle hints right before you realize, wait a minute, Bernard's walking, he turned. But I actually kind of did like that turn of like, yeah, somebody could be a stooge, but still realize, hey, this, still in the end turns toward justice. So I didn't mind that.
Right. No, that's great.
Yeah.
So let us see that. He
right.
totally
They didn't see it.
He told you didn't see it. He's like,
right.
I'm not going to do the work for this.
Right.
It just happened.
Right. It happens off page. Exactly right.
Right.
But one thing, and I hope the show can somehow get here, and I think they can, even with all these crazy changes, is one of the best action set pieces in the book. I mentioned last week on the spoiler section. You've got Juliette doing her reel dive. Suddenly, the air to her suit is gone. She's calling out to Solo. He's not on the, he's not answering on the radio. You have Walker and Shirley being attacked down deep as they're trying to put together a radio to communicate with other people. I love that action happening at all the same time.
Yeah.
I love it so much, and I think the show can still get there. The show has yet to really kind of find a moment like that, and there are, I think, a lot of thrilling action plot points in this book that I'm not sure the show has ever truly had an action scene really play off as fun and have as kind of many different angles or as much happening as in the book. They've still got time, but
right.
I just don't know if they've done it.
The question that is tough is like, because they really seem to like, this show really loves to seem to hold on to reveals.
Yes.
And there's a lot of reveals here because there's separate reveals. We already had the reveal that there's other silos, but then there's the reveal that not only there are other people in the silos, but like Bernard can talk to those people.
Yes.
And then there's the reveal of Walker communicating with Juliette. Those are things that this show would be like, maybe it's 5 seasons till we get to the end of. I mean, there's a lot.
Yeah,
there's a lot to reveal, and I mean, and then forget that, and then forget the additional people in Silo 17. That's another reveal. Like,
yes,
they got a lot to get to. What I presume is, I mean, did you? Because we hadn't read the book before, I haven't been participating in this. But are you assuming that the end of season 2 is the end of this book, or you think they're going to stop somewhere else?
Well, this is something I talked about in one of the book spoiler sections after you let off Catfish. Why? Because it partially ties into possibly a TV spoiler. If you read reviews like I did of the season 2, a season 2 review, the critics got 9 of the 10 episodes. They got to see 9 of the 10 episodes. And in one review, some critics said, boy, Juliette's underwater adventure in episode 9 is thrilling, intense, and all sorts of stuff. And they were asking Rebecca Ferguson about this underwater scenes in episode 9 of this season. And so to me, I'm like, wait a minute. They're keeping the underwater scene till episode 9. That underwater scene that I've already described, I love so much because there's so much happening at the same time. That is actually 75% of the way through the book. That's not like near the end of the book. There's still, like you say, Juliette going out, thinking she's got to rescue Lukas from his cleaning and all this craziness. What I said is there a chance that they won't even get to the end of the first book after 2 scenes, which would seem crazy, but there's just things.
Then how can they, I know that you have thought this through already because that's just what you do. So then what do you surmise is the end of season 2?
I think the end of season 2 is possibly the communication between Walker and the original Silo and Juliette. And you're like, well, how are they going to finish this show in 4 seasons if they're 3 books and they're not even truly close to the end of the first book? This was a discussion point we had on last week's spoiler book talk section. And that is that the second book in the series is a prequel to everything. It's entitled Shift, and almost all of it is set in the distant past. It answers the question, who built this silo? Why did they build this silo? How do these silos operate? Why do they operate? So all of that is set in the people who built it. So there's a debate of, well, obviously you wouldn't cut your main cast and say, okay, you guys get season 3 off. So the idea is, how are they going to integrate this content from Shift, which is and once again, to not spoil the second, third book for you, but the point is things set up in that second book, way back when these silos were built, really kind of pays off at the very end of the third book when it's back to Juliette and our original Silos adventures. So the question we've been asking is, will the show cut the second book entirely? Like cut all the stuff in the past and figure out a way to kind of end the show without that important information in the book series that you need to know about why these things were built.
Well, presumably they would, that would be something people could discover, the important things that are necessary via relics or
Right.
the pact or whatever.
So we have some feedback on this. I want to read it real quick.
Okay.
Rini said, I don't think they obviously want to skip Rebecca Ferguson for a season. So I do think they'll admit Shift, the second book, sadly. Mark wrote, I'm hoping they skip Shift because they could just maybe do it as like flashbacks. Loading error. They wrote, Shift, the second book, was a slow book, but I held on because I knew it would be worth it. We have just somebody with a handle name. User wrote, I loved reading Shift. Finally, Scrap Sweetie Pie, I hope I'm reading this right, Scrap Sweetie Pie said, the origin story of Shift and Silo #1 is some of the best content in my opinion. So some people are okay if they skip Shift. People who love that book are like, don't skip it. Catfish, other people pitched maybe you could do all of Shift in one episode, like figure out the most important things about the silo being built and then just stick it in one episode. How big are those questions to you? Again, you haven't read the second and third book, but how important are those questions to you about what is really going on outside? Or do you not care? Or why did these silos get created, or do you not care? Or did the brief discussion Lukas and Bernard have about it in this first book, did that answer enough for you?
If we assume, the end of the first book is Juliette's going to be in charge now.
Returns to the original silo.
She returns to the original silo. Everyone's going to learn what happened, and we're going to live happily ever after. Right?
Right, yeah.
So, and then crazily enough, and this is the last thing that drove me crazy about this book, is the very last line is about her going up to see her dad,
who hasn't been mentioned in chapters and chapters and chapters. He fell off the cliff, and then suddenly the last line is, I got to go see this character we haven't mentioned in 200 pages.
That's what got healed in her life, that she needs to reconnect with family. Obviously, it's only going to take one Thanksgiving for him to talk about tariffs, and she's done.
Listen. She's going to go. Solo's going to say, "Oh, look who else is in this silo," and it's going to be Dom from the Fast and Furious movie. It's all about family.
Now, look, some of these red level relics that mostly they talked about in the first season and have been talked about in this show here are not really in the first book.
No.
So what I think it feels like they have been doing and can continue to do is give us more sprinkled information. Doesn't need to be flashbacks, can be from relics or whatever, could be flashbacks. But again, if we're following Juliette's story, and like you said in the book, we're not really, these are different short stories, so it was not different novellas cobbled together. So, it wasn't even Juliette's story until the second novella. So in the show, we've got to follow Juliette. So the past isn't that important only as far as it sort of affects the present and future of the silo.
Yeah, no, that's completely it. Listeners, what do you want to do? We've got so much feedback that I'm going to cut some of it off, but you see Jacob wrote in, maybe Shift, this prequel stuff could be its own show. So Apple TV wants as many hits as possible. You've got original Shift, and then you tell the story of how the silos were created. It's almost House of the Dragon prequel to Game of Thrones. You have Shift as a prequel to Silo. It certainly could be done. Hey,
we'll call it Silo Prophecy. One thing we forgot to talk about, I don't know if you want to throw this in a little bit. No, just a book stuff is, so the way we saw Lukas brought in this show, they're just like, no, we're gonna just like kick him off to the side. He's not going to be in IT.
No.
The communication he's having with Juliette feels like that is going to need to be picked up. Just by Walker or whoever, because she needs to have that connection.
I loved Juliette's communication with Lukas in the book. I already said it. I also love Juliette taunting Bernard through the communication. I loved that in the book. Let me ask you this. Do you think whenever they allow her into the vault, do you think this kind of taunting of Bernard and communication with somebody back in Silo 18 is going to happen? Or do you think they're going to skip it because it's more fun to have Steve Zahn and Rebecca Ferguson fight each other?
Yeah, I don't see them. I mean, they haven't. I'm curious to see, are they even going to have Bernard communicate with other people?
Yep.
He seems to be a little bit more in command in the book than in the show.
Oh, without question.
So it doesn't seem like he would be the kind of person that would be like, I've got a problem. I've got to call another silo.
No. Let me say, I said on last week's book talk section that my favorite thing about Bernard in the book is the section where he's telling Lukas, you want to know about the past? Screw them. They screwed us over. How exactly does he say it? He's like, you know what? They make us live by our rules, so we keep surviving and living, but their rules are also what makes us miserable. And so Bernard, who I always call a mustache-twirling villain in the book, that little section makes me like him more. I'm like, that is a real person. That is how a real person would react. It'd be like, I hate what I'm doing, but I have to do it or else we're all going to die. So you
still enjoyed that while he was torturing Lukas by having him locked into the vault for weeks on end.
Have you read the damn book? You're reading the wrong books, Lukas. Once again, thank you guys for joining us so much in the book talk section. Next week, because Lukas is going to be in it more, we'll dive into this debate. Maybe we'll have even more debate of Catfish and I of book Lukas's success as a character versus maybe his, kind of shortcomings as a character. Either way, you can reach out to me on all social media. My name's Bubba. You can find me the handle at FittenTrim. That's FITTENTRIM at FittenTrim on social media.
And I'm Catfish. You can hit me up at GEETOTHEMAN, to the man, on Instagram and Blue Sky. And we'll talk to you next week on
The Cleaning. Hell to the yeah.